So the last thing I wanted to do is just lay out my taxonomy real quick. As I was studying it, one of the things I noticed is that American Christian nationalism is not just one thing. And as I was reading and listening to Christian nationalists now, it seemed to me that I could group them into three major groups. And it's really almost about theological rationale. Okay? Which unfortunately I don't think the secondary literature on Christian nationalism actually, much of it doesn't slow down enough and actually listen to Christian nationalists to hear what it is that they're saying and why it is that they're saying it. But anyway, long story short, the first type that I use I call covenant nation. And this is the classic form of American Christian nationalism. And it works on a typology, a connection between ancient Israel and the United States. That what Israel was to God, in terms of having a distinctive covenant relationship, the United States is now. I was reading a Thanksgiving sermon from a covenant minister, a congregational minister in Massachusetts, 1799. And he says, there's a term that I hear all the time that I agree with, the American Israel. The dead giveaway, whenever I know I'm into this mind frame, is if eventually they quote that 2 Chronicles passage, people called by my name will humble themselves. You'll know this passage. That's usually used someplace within that. Oftentimes they'll use a phrase that the Puritans like so much and apply to themselves, a light set on a hill. And the basic notion there is that Old Testament notion. It's strongly based on Deuteronomy. You are obedient to God. God brings prosperity. You need to be obedient so that you as a distinct covenant people can fulfill your mission in the world. I mean, I just tried to summarize, Exodus through Deuteronomy real quickly. And is that notion applied to the United States? Okay. I mean, I have a mischievous sense of humor. So, for instance, I'm always intrigued by the folks who are calling for the posting of the 10 Commandments, in schools and stuff. And I go, why don't they ever call for the posting of the Beatitudes?
Well, no one wants to do that.
Well, but I think it's also ultimately rooted in that notion of America and Israel. And the foundational quality of those 10 Commandments for that covenant. And we're trying to replicate that dynamic. Make a little sense? So what's interesting, where this plays out liturgically, and we'll see this more tomorrow, is almost inevitably when I see a Celebrate America service, where the whole service is dedicated, and you dig beneath the service, I find that covenant nation sort of thinking there. And this is the classic form of American Christian nationalism. Okay? The second form is actually rather newer and seems to have only arisen since the 1990s. And it's much like a virus. It has evolved from earlier forms of Pentecostal theology and spirituality. And I call this the dominionist approach.
Can you repeat that, please?
The dominionist approach. The goal, the basic thinking is that in the created order, God gave us dominion. Satan took it away. Jesus has given it back. And we need to step out in faith, reclaim it, and begin to exercise it. So they do an interesting read of particular passages. They like that Genesis 1 passage, the creation narrative. Okay? God gives humans dominion. They also do an interesting read on the Lord's Prayer. So it's an approach that makes a really strong emphasis on human agency. Our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done. And we're going to be the answer to that prayer. It's a shift in Pentecostal eschatology too. So rather than kind of a passive sort of thing that Christ has to come first before the 1,000-year reign can be established, that it becomes post-millennial. We do our faithful work for God to establish the 1,000-year reign, and then Christ comes at the end of it. There's a wonderful master's thesis that was just done in a Georgia university by a communications student of all things. He did a wonderful close analysis of the preaching in 4 key Pentecostal megachurches to assess their doctrine of the 1,000-year reign and its relationship to their sense of cultural and political turmoil and what it is that they need to be doing. The other interesting text that they use, these folks often use, is the Great Commission. So notice Jesus says, all authority, notice what a strong dominion sort of word that is, all authority on heaven and on earth has been given to me, Jesus said. Therefore go and make disciples of all. What if you interpret that as nation state? The Greek word there is ethne, means people, people's group. But what if you take, go and make disciples of all nation states, teaching them to obey everything that I've commanded you. Can you sense that? Okay, fusion, use of cultural and political means in order to force implementation of a certain Christian ethic. Okay. This often gets tied with 2 other important dynamics to the theology. One is a long-standing classic aspect of Christian spirituality, the emphasis on spiritual warfare, which is not a new thing. I mean, it's in the Apostle Paul, but it's a classic aspect of Christian spirituality.
Let me tell you why.
Yes?
At this moment, 10:05 a.m., I was born 60 years ago.
Well, I tell you what, pause button on anything I was talking about. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear Jonathan. Happy birthday to you.
Thank you very much.
I think that was Christian personalism.
That's right. And I just remembered the one introductory thing I wanted to do, but I was so eager to get to the material. I wanted to give everybody a chance to introduce themselves. So we'll do that immediately after break, if that sounds good. Okay?
Spiritual warfare.
Spiritual warfare. Yeah, thank you very much. Very classic sense. Classically, it was usually applied not just to the elimination of devils and demons, exorcising people, which has a classic Christian rooting to it, or the spiritual warfare as us fighting against the sinful nature, that sort of thing. Those are kind of more classic. This picks up an interesting notion originally coming out of Africa, which emphasizes that devils or demons can have control over certain regions, territories, or spheres of human existence. And so what develops is the tactical use of intercessory prayer and praise in order to wreck demonic power in a territory, region, or sphere of human existence. So, and so they will go someplace. And oftentimes, if you're seeing, for instance, praise and worship services done at specific locales, that's to pursue tactical spiritual warfare. Okay? The other interesting thing is developed in the 1990s is a new theological development based on a prophecy that came out of Pentecostalism, I think it was early 90s. I can look this up. The Seven Mountain Mandate. So if you're hearing that language, that's this middle strand of Christian nationalism. And it's basically the idea that there are seven main mountains or spheres of human culture. And you need to discern which of those God has called you to exercise dominion over. Climb that mountain and exercise the dominion. Okay? So you have covenant nation, and these folks, when I'm finding them denominationally, these folks tend to be mainstream evangelicals or mainline folks. So the example that I will show you tomorrow, and we'll look about 12 to 13 minutes at the beginning of their Celebrate America service from last year, is a Methodist church in South Carolina. Okay? These folks tend to be Pentecostal, charismatic, and spillover effect. Okay? Because when you read the literature, it doesn't say, now if you're a Baptist, don't read this book. Okay? They want everybody to read. Now the third group is actually the smallest, and from what I can tell, has the least impact on church sanctuaries. Oh, and I can't tell that these folks, the Dominionists, really do kind of the whole hog Celebrate America services. Okay? So it's a different sort of liturgical expression. These folks are the misogynists. So the thing that's really got them upset is changing gender roles and the ability of women to be in positions of authority. And the folks who are in this camp that I have found so far tend to be, in their broader theology, Calvinist. And it's interesting, of the three groups, I find the people in the groups sometimes use the language of Christian nationalist as a self-identity. These folks have no fear about that at all. They're very clear. Their books, a case for Christian nationalism. And I read it, and ultimately it's, and their language. Gosh, their language. Can I upset you a little bit, perhaps? Like one of the more philosophically astute ones, he talks about the Guynification of America. It's the feminizing of America. It's the qualities of being a woman, those traits and that mind frame has now become pervasive through American culture, generally, in virility and strength and manliness are no longer held up, but cooperation and empathy. I mean, notwithstanding the gross oversimplification of gender traits and characteristics. Anyway, it makes sense though, right? Okay? Covenant nation, dominionist, and I don't have any better term for them other than misogynist. Okay? And I finally made contact with one of these fellows. There's some very overt books. So I just sent cold emails to the author. And one of them actually responded. He's a pastor of a small church up in Wisconsin. So I corresponded with him. I said, how does your Christian nationalism impacting your worship? He says, not really. I think you would hear it in his sermons. And if you went and visited the church, the thing that you would notice is that women do nothing that even begins to represent any sort of position or status of authority. And he structures worship in terms of covenant renewal, which is a very kind of reformed sort of way of doing it. How are we doing? Doing okay? Making sense? Okay.